It's 3 in the morning, you've gotten up to get some water. The fridge projects that yellowish light that kitchens have at these hours, and just as you reach out to open it, something moves. A gray flash behind the washing machine. You don't quite see it, you don't need to. Your body has understood it before your mind has. Your skin crawls, your heart gives a thud in your chest, and a single word rises to your mouth with a clarity that almost hurts rat. Few words carry such weight in our language. Rat is betrayal. Rat is filth. Rat is disease. Rat is the informer, the coward, the one who abandons a sinking ship. It is the creature that appears in our nightmares. In the sewers, in the underground tunnels at midnight, in the collective imagination, it is everything we don't want to be, everything we don't want to touch, everything we never want our children's sin to touch. But I'm going to tell you something uncomfortable. That creature that makes you jump on a chair is, with considerable probability, the non-human living being that has saved more human lives in the history of science. Without it, half the medicines in your medicine cabinet would not exist. And it is entirely possible that you yourself are alive thanks to some treatment that first passed through its small body. We have spent centuries looking at the rat in the wrong direction. This is its story, and also, though we may not like it, ours. To understand what a rat really is, you have to go back about 12 million years to some humid corner of Southeast Asia. There, a small rodent mammal began to separate from its relatives. It had no imposing claws, it had no venom. It didn't run especially fast. What it had was something far more valuable in the long run. A flexible brain, a diet without fussiness, and a reproductive capacity that bordered on the obscene. The genus Rattus, which today groups more than 60 species, is in evolutionary terms a masterpiece of generalization. While other animals specialized, the panda with its bamboo, the koala with its eucalyptus, the rat bet on the opposite, on total versatility. It eats seeds, fruits, insects, carcasses, plastic, soap, leather, electrical cables. There are documented cases in which it has gnawed cement. Its digestive system is so efficient that it extracts nutrients from materials that most mammals cannot even process. But its true genius is not in what it eats, but in how it learns. Rats possess what neuroscientists call episodic memory, the ability to remember specific events in specific contexts, a skill that for decades was considered exclusive to humans and some birds. A rat is capable of navigating complex mazes, recognizing objects it hasn't seen for weeks, and above all, learning from its mistakes with a speed that any animal trainer highlights as exceptional. There is a classic experiment, replicated dozens of times in different laboratories, that gives a sense of vertigo. Rats avoid foods that have made them ill even after having tried them just once. Biologists call it conditioned taste aversion. And translated into everyday language, it means that their nervous system is capable of making a very sophisticated generalization. I became ill with this, therefore this taste is dangerous. That kind of rapid connection between experience and survival is exactly the engine that made it possible for our own species to get this far. And then there is the matter of communication, which is where the story starts to become genuinely strange. Rats communicate in ultrasound, frequencies that the human ear cannot pick up without special equipment. And when researchers began to analyze these vocalizations, they found something that still generates unresolved philosophical debates today. Rats emit a specific call around 50 kilohertz when they play, when they are tickled, when they anticipate something pleasant. Some scientists, with all the inverted commas in the world, but without hiding a certain astonishment, have called it rat laughter. The Estonian neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp, who spent decades studying basic emotions in mammals, documented that if you tickle a rat on a specific spot on its back, a spot they themselves actively seek, it emits these vocalizations constantly and comes back for more again and again, chasing the researcher's hand like a child asking for more caresses. Panksepp interpreted this as evidence that the neurological substrate of joy, that primary sensation of well-being, is not a human invention. It is a very ancient evolutionary inheritance that we share with creatures we normally step on without a second thought. Perhaps we should think about it a little more. The history of the rat and the history of the human being are not two parallel stories. They are literally the same story. Rattus rattus, the black rat, is native to South Asia and began its global expansion about 2,000 years ago, following the trade routes of the Roman Empire. It was small, agile, climbed like no other, and felt at home on Mediterranean sailing vessels, where it found easy food, warm shelter, and practically no predators. When the ships arrived in port, the rats disembarked. And when they set sail again, they normally went accompanied. Rattus norvegicus, the brown rat, also known as the Norway rat, although it is actually native to China, in one of those historical misunderstandings that say so much about how we name what we don't understand, arrived in Europe much later, around the 17th century, and turned out to be a superior competitor. Larger, more aggressive, more fertile, more comfortable in the sewers and underground spaces of cities, growing without restraint. It displaced its black cousin from almost all continental urban environments, with an efficiency that ecologists still study as an example of Competition between species. The curious thing is that this was not a biological invasion in the usual sense. The rats did not travel alone. They traveled with us. Inside our ships, inside our caravans, inside our grain sacks. The technical term is synanthropic, an organism that benefits from the environments created by human beings. But that word sounds too aseptic to describe what actually happened. The rats didn't find a gap in our civilization. They evolved with it. They adapted in real time to every city we built, to every new sewage system, to every new way of storing food. We are their ecosystem. And we have been so for so long that they can no longer be separated from us without disfiguring both. An adult rat in New York, Madrid, or Mexico City is today a completely different animal in behavior from its wild cousins. It has learned to move through impossible environments. It has developed tolerance to poisons that would have killed its grandmothers. In several American cities, urban lineages have been identified with specific mutations in genes associated with the metabolism of certain toxins, mutations that appeared in just a few decades. In the invisible margins of our cities, the rat is responding to us, evolution in real time. And most of us don't even know it. Let's talk about the plague at this point. It would be dishonest not to address what almost everyone thinks when they think about rats: death, pestilence, plague, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1353, something like a third or half of the European population died in one of the most catastrophic events ever recorded by humanity, and for centuries the verdict was unanimous: rats were to blame. But history, as almost always, is more complicated. The Black Death was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. That is established. The main vector of transmission was the rat flea Xenopsilla chiopus, which infected humans after feeding on sick rats. So yes, a connection exists. But to say that rats caused the plague is like saying that aeroplanes caused 9/11 without mentioning the hijackers. It is a simplification that conceals more than it explains. To begin with, Yersinia pestis is a pathogen that infects dozens of rodent species. Marmots, squirrels, mice, lemmings. It still exists today in natural foci in the Central Asian steppes, in the American West, and parts of Africa. Rats are not the original reservoir of the disease. They are victims, just like us, only somewhat more resistant to certain strains. What turned the epidemic of the 14th century into something biblical was not the biology of the rats. It was the biology of the medieval cities: unprecedented overcrowding, a total absence of sanitation, widespread malnutrition, and a maritime trade that, for the first time in history, connected Asia and Europe on a massive scale. What's more, recent research published in journals such as PNAS or eLife has mathematically modeled the patterns of plague propagation and reached uncomfortable conclusions for the traditional narrative. In several of the outbreaks studied, the speed and geography of the epidemic fit better with a model of direct person-to-person transmission through human fleas and lice than with a rodent-based model. That does not entirely exonerate rats, but it suggests that the version we have been telling ourselves for centuries has a scapegoat that was perhaps less guilty than we believed. And here comes what, if I had to bet, is probably the most important statistic in this entire video: 95%. That is the percentage of laboratory animals used today in biomedical research worldwide that belong to the group of rodents. And of that 95%, the overwhelming majority are rats and mice. Each year, in laboratories spread across all continents, tens of millions of rats are used in experiments ranging from the testing of new drugs to the study of memory, from the understanding of cancer to the development of vaccines. Why the rat? The answer has several layers, and each one reveals something about the very nature of life. First, basic biology. Mammals share a common architecture: the same four-chambered heart, the same nervous system with the same neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, and the same circuits for processing pain, pleasure, fear, and memory. An immune system that recognizes pathogens in a similar way. Cells that divide by the same mechanisms, and when that division becomes uncontrolled and turns into cancer, the tumors have surprisingly similar properties in both species. Second, the genome. In 2004, the journal Nature published the complete sequencing of the genome of Rattus norvegicus. What the researchers found was, in the words of one of the authors, disturbing in the best possible sense. The rat genome contains around 2,750,000,000 base pairs, comparable in size to the human genome. And more than 90% of its genes have a direct equivalent in our genome. Not similar, not analogous, equivalent. Genes that perform the same functions, that are switched on and off by the same mechanisms, that produce the same proteins. At the level of the genetic code, we are far closer cousins than any superficial glance would suggest. Third, logistics. An adult rat weighs between 200 and 500 grams. It fits in the palm of your hand. It eats little. It takes up little space. It lives between 2 and 3 years, long enough to study aging, chronic diseases, and the long-term effects of a treatment, but short enough for research to advance at a reasonable pace. And its reproductive cycle is fiendishly fast. A female can become pregnant at 5 or 6 months, gestation lasts barely 3 weeks, and each litter produces between 8 and 12 pups. If you need to generate a colony with specific genetic characteristics for an experiment, with rats you can achieve it in months. With primates, you would be waiting years or decades. The specific contributions of the rat to human medicine are so numerous that listing them would turn this into an endless inventory. But some deserve explicit mention because they probably touch you more closely than you think. Insulin. Before Frederick Banting and Charles Best could administer it to a diabetic human in 1922, they tested it on dogs. But it was the previous experiments on rats that made it possible to understand the mechanisms of the pancreas and diabetes in sufficient detail for that leap to be possible. Today, more than 500 million people in the world live with type 2 diabetes. Without rats, the story of that disease would be a very different one. Cancer. Murine models, rats and mice with induced or transplanted tumors. Cornerstone of modern oncology. Every chemotherapy drug that exists first passed through the body of a rat. Every immunotherapy, every kinase inhibitor, every monoclonal antibody that is today administered to a cancer patient was dosed, refined, and validated in rats before reaching a human clinical trial. Not because researchers are indifferent to the welfare of those animals, ethics committees exist in all serious laboratories, and the debate about animal welfare in science is genuine, increasingly rigorous. But because the only real alternative would be to test directly on humans, and that is not ethically acceptable. Neuroscience, almost everything we know about how memory works, about the hippocampus, about sleep consolidation, about post-traumatic stress, comes from experiments on rats. Long-term potentiation, the mechanism by which synapses are strengthened during learning, was first described in the hippocampus of a rat in the 70s. Today it is the standard model of synaptic plasticity in all mammals, including us, mental illness. Rat models for depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia are imperfect. No animal model can fully capture the complexity of human psychiatric experience. But they are the best we have, and they have allowed us to develop and test the efficacy of benzodiazepines, Fresnel antidepressants, atypical antipsychotics. If you take a Prozac, a Lexapro, a Risperdal, or someone close to you does, there is a rat somewhere in the history of that drug. Vaccines, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, hypertension, antibiotics. In virtually every area of modern medicine, there are rats at some point in the development chain. Stop for a moment and think about what this means. The animal you dread encountering in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. The animal you call the exterminator about. The animal whose name you use as an insult. That animal carries in its small body the secret of most of the treatments that keep you alive. That keep your parents alive. That will one day keep your children alive. It is an uncomfortable exercise, but it is worth doing. What would happen if tomorrow, by some divine decree or catastrophic error, all the rats in all the laboratories in the world disappeared? Phase 1 clinical trials of any new medicine would have nowhere to begin. The FDA, the EMA, and all regulatory bodies on the planet require animal model testing before authorizing any human experiment. Without rats, that chain breaks. New cancer treatments currently in development, and there are hundreds, would stop. Studies on Alzheimer's, a disease that affects more than 50 million people, and for which there is still no treatment that halts its progression, would lose their most widely used models. Research into infectious diseases, including those involving coronaviruses, a subject the world learned to take seriously a few years ago, at very high cost, would be left without the experimental substrate needed to produce vaccines at the speed that history has shown we sometimes need. This is not speculation. It is simply reading the footnotes of modern science and asking what would happen if we erase them. And here is the paradox this piece has been building towards all along. The animal that has contributed most to human health in the history of science is at the same time the animal that generates the most fear and revulsion in the majority of human beings. This is not a minor irony. It is a contradiction that says something profound about how we function as a species. We are capable of holding two truths simultaneously. The rat disgusts me. The rat saves my life, without either of them brushing against the other in our conscious mind. There is a third type of rat that almost never appears in these conversations and that finishes dismantling the narrative. Since the late 19th century, when some English breeders began selecting rats with unusual color patterns to exhibit at fairs, the domestic rat has existed. Today, in many European and North American countries, rats are one of the most popular pets within the group of exotic animals. They are intelligent, they bond with their owners in a way not very different from dogs, they recognize their names, they learn tricks, they groom one another, and they display what many owners, with all the caution that is appropriate when speaking of animals, describe as genuine affection. There are studies published in peer-reviewed animal behavior journals documenting that domestic rats release oxytocin when interacting with their human owners. Oxytocin is the so-called bonding hormone, the same one that is released between mothers and babies, between couples, between dogs and their owners. The chemistry of social connection appears to be, once again, far more ancient and far more shared than our superficial perception would lead us to believe. What do we do with the fact that the most vilified animal in urban history is also our most silent ally in the fight against disease? What do we do with the discomfort of knowing that our revulsion has an understandable evolutionary root? Rodents can transmit disease. Detecting them in the environment was adaptive. But that root has grown into something that distorts our perception of reality? I am not going to ask you to embrace rats. I am not going to ask you to invite one to dinner. Revulsion is an emotion with deep biological roots, and it does not dissolve with a video, however hard the video tries. What I ask of you is something more modest and, in a certain sense, more radical. That the next time you see one in the kitchen at 3 in the morning on the underground peering out of a drain, you reserve a second, just 1 second, to acknowledge that you don't know the whole story, that this gray animal, with small eyes and a nose always in motion, has traveled the entire world clinging to our ships, that it has survived the worst extermination campaigns we have attempted against it, that it has evolved in real time to adapt to every new strategy we have devised to end it, that it laughs at a frequency your ears cannot pick up when someone tickles it, that it recognizes the smells of its offspring and separates them from those of strangers with a precision that artificial sensors cannot yet match, and that at this very moment, in some laboratory in Tokyo, Boston, or Barcelona, a rat is helping to find the treatment that may one day save the life of someone you love. The evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould once said that organisms are neither good nor bad, neither dirty nor clean, neither noble nor vile. They are responses of evolution to specific problems of survival. And the problem that the rat solved, with an elegance that is hard not to admire if one allows oneself to look at it squarely, is the most difficult of all. How to survive in a world that changes faster than any biological lineage can anticipate. The rat solved that problem before us, and it has been accompanying us at every step of the way ever since. Perhaps, when we think of it that way, the question is not why we live with rats. The question is whether we ever had any other option.